I never thought a simple wooden fence would drag me into a war. But that's how it began. One plain fence, 6 feet high, painted a modest gray to match the siding of my small townhouse. Nothing flashy, nothing radical, just privacy for my backyard after years of city apartment living. I was 39, a high school history teacher, divorced, and newly settled into a neighborhood called Maplewood Hills. The brochures had promised quiet streets, friendly neighbors, and strong community values. What they didn't mention was that those values came with shackles in the form of the Homeowners Association, led by a woman named Gloria Harper. Gloria was in her late 50s, sharp bob haircut, immaculate suits, and a voice that could freeze water. She ruled Maplewood Hills like a monarch, her word filtering through board members and committees until every detail of our lives seemed monitored. I didn't know any of that when I moved in. I just knew the mortgage payments fit my budget. The townhouse had a patch of yard, and the place felt like a chance to start over. The first warning came within a week of finishing the fence. A notice, taped to my door, said the color did not comply with approved palette guidelines. I thought it was a mistake. I wrote back, pointing out that the bylaws only specified fence height and material, not color. Gloria replied personally with a 2-page letter filled with citations and condescending remarks about community harmony. I shrugged it off until the second notice arrived, a fine for leaving my garbage bin visible past the 24-hour limit. Then another for excessive lawn variation, meaning I had planted marigolds along the edge. By month's end, I owed nearly $500. At my first HOA meeting, I realized resistance wasn't welcome. The board sat at a long table like judges, with Gloria in the center. When I tried to ask about the fines, she cut me off mid-sentence. "Mr. Reynolds, if you had familiarized yourself with our standards, you wouldn't be wasting everyone's time." The crowd of homeowners mostly avoided my eyes, though I caught a sympathetic glance from a woman in the back. That night, I learned what everyone already knew. Gloria's control wasn't just about rules, it was about fear. The harassment escalated. My mailbox was deemed non-conforming. My car, a 15-year-old Jeep, was unsightly. I started getting violation slips for things that weren't even mine. Weeds in the neighbor's yard attributed to me. Noise complaints on nights I wasn't home. Each carried a fine, and each fine was tacked onto my account like a snowball rolling downhill. I would have paid and moved on, but teaching doesn't make you rich, and stubbornness is my fatal flaw. So I appealed. I filed forms. I sent emails. Gloria responded with more fines, more notices, and finally a summons. Appear at the board hearing or risk property lien. When I showed up, the board voted unanimously to uphold every charge. It was like watching a play where everyone knew their lines except me. That's when I realized this wasn't incompetence. It was a racket. The breaking point came after a weekend trip. I returned to find my backyard fence torn down. In its place stood a flimsy white lattice structure that barely reached 4 feet, leaving my yard completely exposed. A notice on my door informed me the HOA had corrected the violation and billed me $3,000 for the replacement. I remember standing there, fists shaking, neighbors peeking from their curtains, and Gloria across the street watching me with a smile. I almost lost it, but instead I made a call. Not to the HOA, but to the woman I'd seen at the first meeting, the one who had looked sympathetic. Her name was Angela Morales, and she was a paralegal at a downtown firm. We met at a diner the next morning. "You're not alone," she said quietly over coffee. "Gloria has done this for years. People who fight back end up leaving. Their houses sell cheap to buyers connected to the board. Then the properties get flipped. It's a cycle." I stared at her, stunned. "So it's deliberate?" Angela nodded. She pulled out a folder, thick with copies of violation letters, financial records, and meeting minutes. "I've been documenting everything, but I can't take it further alone. I wasn't a lawyer, but years of teaching history had made me stubborn about justice." We joined forces. Our first ally was Kevin Liu, a city inspector I'd befriended when he guest lectured at my school. Kevin dug through permit files and found that the corrective lattice fence had been approved in less than 48 hours by a building official married to one of the board members. Our second ally was my sister Claire, a freelance journalist always hunting for a good scandal. She began tracing property transfers in Maplewood Hills, discovering a string of foreclosures followed by sales to shell companies tied to Gloria's son-in-law. The pattern was clear: harass homeowners, bury them in fines, then scoop up their properties for pennies. Gloria must have sensed I was digging. Within days, I received a threatening note shoved under my door. "Stop before you lose more than a fence." That same night, my Jeep's windshield was smashed. The police officer who took the report looked sympathetic but jaded. "We've had other complaints about this HOA. Nothing sticks." I refused to back down. Angela and I held a secret meeting in her basement with a handful of neighbors who had suffered similar abuse. There was Mr. Hahn, fined daily until he sold his home, the Whitakers, who had been cited for hanging a small memorial flag for their son, and Mrs. Thompson, an elderly widow nearly driven into foreclosure. Their stories were heartbreaking and enraging. We pooled evidence. Angela mapped the timeline of violations. Claire built a dossier of financial connections. Kevin drafted a report on permit irregularities, and I installed cameras around my property, determined to catch the next dirty trick. The cameras paid off sooner than expected. 2 board members were caught sneaking into my yard at midnight, carrying a small bag. The next morning, during a surprise inspection, Gloria arrived with a police officer, claiming she had credible reports of illegal substances on my property. She led in straight to the spot where the bag had been planted. But instead of drugs, the officer found nothing, because I had removed the bag after catching them on video. When I showed him the footage, his entire demeanor shifted. Gloria sputtered, insisting it was doctored. The officer left, looking very unimpressed. That was the first crack in her armor. From there, momentum built. Claire published an article, anonymous sources, but damning details, about predatory HOAs in the county. Kevin leaked documents showing forged boundary maps, expanding HOA control onto public land. Angela drafted a legal complaint, citing fraud, harassment, and misappropriation of funds. Gloria retaliated with everything she had: new fines, threats, even a notice of foreclosure proceedings for unpaid dues. But the harder she pushed, the more neighbors rallied. At the next HOA meeting, instead of the usual handful, nearly every homeowner in Maplewood Hills showed up. The board tried to follow their script, but residents shouted them down. Someone demanded financial transparency. Someone else called for Gloria's resignation. And then, in a stunning moment, one of Gloria's own allies, her treasurer, a nervous man named Frank, slid a flash drive across the table toward me. "I can't do this anymore," he whispered. On it were emails, bank records, and proof that HOA funds had been funneled into Gloria's private real estate ventures. It was the nail in the coffin. With Angela's legal filing, Kevin's official report, and Frank's evidence, we secured an injunction freezing the HOA's accounts and suspending the board's authority. The city launched an investigation. News vans parked at the neighborhood entrance. Gloria tried to bluff, calling it all a smear campaign. But when Frank testified publicly, her empire collapsed. Within weeks, she was indicted for fraud, conspiracy, and misuse of funds. Several board members resigned under pressure. The lattice fence came down, replaced by my original gray panels in a small victory celebration, where neighbors clapped as the last piece was nailed in. But the real change was deeper. For the first time since moving in, I saw people step out of their houses, not in fear, but in solidarity. We formed a temporary resident committee, elected Angela as chair, and began drafting new rules built on fairness and transparency. We limited the board's power, required open books, and created a simple appeals process for violations. We even organized block parties, something Gloria had once fined people for. The neighborhood came alive. Kids rode bikes down the street without parents worrying about noise violations. Mrs. Thompson planted roses across her whole yard. The Whitakers hung their memorial flag proudly. And I finally sat in my backyard, behind my sturdy fence, without feeling watched. Months later, Gloria was sentenced to prison. Watching her led away in handcuffs, I felt no triumph, only relief. Relief that the nightmare was over, that the shadow over Maplewood Hills had lifted. But I also felt something unexpected: gratitude. Not to Gloria, but to the neighbors who had stood beside me. To Angela, whose quiet determination never faltered. To Kevin and Claire, who risked their reputations to expose the truth. Together, we hadn't just beaten a corrupt HOA, we had built a real community. Sometimes, I sit on my porch at dusk, listening to kids laugh and dogs bark, things Gloria once considered disruptive. And I think about that first notice taped to my door, the spark that lit everything. The HOA tried to wall me in, break me down, and drive me out. Instead, they forced me to fight. And in fighting, I found something worth more than property rights or fences. I found a neighborhood, a family, and I'll never forget the lesson. Power built on fear crumbles the moment people stop being afraid.